Assalamu alaikum. This is the third lecture in Economics of Resources course directed to first year. The second topic of our part is about water resources. As we know that water is considered one type of renewable resources, and this type of renewable resources can be replaced during the lifetime of human being unless their use exceeds the rate that can be replaced. In fact, water is the source of life for all living things and is considered an economic good. In this part, we will learn the following points: the supply of water, the demand for water, how can we measure price elasticity of water demand, what about Egypt, what are the main sources of water in Egypt, and the water demand in Egypt, what's meant by water transfer and water scarcity, and new concepts which is virtual water, and the last point about water quality in Egypt. How can we determine whether there is a pollution in water or not, and what are the main approaches in order to reduce water pollution. Our first step to understand water resources is to study water market. What's meant by water market? Market means interaction between demand and supply. Thereby, we're gonna study what's meant by water demand and water supply. Concerning water supply, we will learn the main sources of water, how can we store water, water supply curve, the definition of water supply curve, how to draw water supply curve, what is the difference between movement and shift in water supply curve. Concerning the water demand, also we have to know the definition of water demand, what are the main sectors that demand water, how can we draw the water demand curve, what is the difference between movement along the curve and the shift in the water demand curve, how can we calculate the price elasticity of water demand, and when the water demand equal water supply we get equilibrium, and whether the water demand is greater than water supply, thereby would be a shortage in the water market. In this case, how can we fill this gap? What are other sources of water supply that can fill the gap in water market? Thereby, in this lecture, we will learn the following points. First of all, the supply of water. What are the main sources of water? How can we store water? And how can we draw supply curve for water and the difference between movement and shift in the water supply curve. Finally, we will talk about demand for water and how can we draw the demand curve for water, who demands water in general, the main sectors that demand water, and difference between movement and shifts in water demand curve. Concerning the water supply, we have two main sources of water. We have surface water, which is located on the earth's crust, above the earth's crust, like streams, rivers, lakes, rain catchment, and groundwater. Groundwater, it is below the earth's crust and not more than 2,500 feet below the earth's crust. Okay, let's start by surface water. It has many advantages. First of all, related to the location, it has an easy location, can be easily located. It doesn't need any developed machinery in order to find such a kind of source of water, and information is available on the quality and the quantity of the present supplies of surface water. Finally, once it gets polluted, the treatment cost is lower than that of groundwater. But the only drawbacks or disadvantages of surface water, can be easily polluted. On the other side, groundwater, as we said before, it is below the earth's crust. Okay, so one advantage of groundwater is that it doesn't get easily polluted, and its quality is stable through the year. The quality of groundwater is stable through the year. But it has many disadvantages. First of all, although in general water is considered a renewable resource, the groundwater is non-renewable because it renewed it much more slowly. 60% only of it is renewed or replenish itself within 50 years. Also, although it does not easily get polluted, but once this source of water gets polluted, it is very complex to recover it. And it is not easy to remove pollutant from groundwater. Its treatment cost is very high, and it may have hidden sources of pollutant. Let's move now to the storage of raw water. Why do we need to store water? Actually, when the flow of water or the supply of water is at a low level, we need to store water in order to meet the demands for water. We have two kinds of water storage, or two types of water storage. Natural storage, for example, rivers or lakes, and human-made storage made by human being, for example, dams. So, there are two types of raw water storage. Natural storage in the form of rivers and lakes, and man-made storage in the form of dams. As we have said before, in order to know the water market, we have first to study the water supply curve, and second, the water demand curve. Concerning water supply, we know the sources of water and how can we store water. Water supply curve, like any supply curve of any product, it is upward sloping and shows the marginal cost of producing water and reflects seller willing to supply more water as price increases. Like any supply curve, it is upward sloping, reflecting the positive relationship between the water quantity and the price of water. Water quantity is get by two sources, surface water and groundwater. They are the main sources of waters. Like any supply curve, we have to differentiate between movement along the curve and shifts in curve. The factor that is responsible for movement along the curve is the price level, while shifts in the curve relating to other factors except the price level. What are factors that are responsible for increasing water supply or rightward shift in water supply curve? We have two main factors that are responsible for increase in the water supply. First of all, if we have investment in existing system. Investment in the existing system, for example, if we made some improvement in the infrastructure. Okay, if we made some improvement in infrastructure, we get more quantity of water, and then supply curve for water will shift rightward. Second, if we shift from one type of water supply to another type. If we are moving from one type of water supply to another type, for example, switching to salt water desalination, we reuse water, we recycle the water. Okay, we shift from one type of water supply to another type. This causes a rightward shift in water supply curve. Now let's move to water demand curve. Here we have to know what's meant by water demand curve. What are main sectors inside any economy that demand water? What is the difference between movement along the demand curve for water and shifts in the curve? First of all, water demand curve shows the marginal benefit of getting water to consumption use or agricultural use and industrial use. Water is demanded by actually three sectors: by household sector, and by industrial sector and agriculture sector. We have three sectors that demand water inside any economy: household sector, industrial sector, and agriculture sector. Any change in the price of water is responsible for movement along one point to another point along the demand curve, the same demand curve. While we have several factors except the price that are responsible for shifts in the whole curve. When we say that the water demand increases, it means that we have rightward shift in the whole demand curve. And when we say that the water demand decreases, it means that we have leftward shift in the whole curve. As we said, we have three sectors that demand water. First of all, household sector. So there is a demand curve for household sector, demand curve for industrial and agriculture sectors. First of all, imagine that this demand curve is household water demand curve. Movement along the household water demand is caused by changes in the price level, while shifts in the curve is due to household income. If household income increases, we have rightward shift in the water demand curve. If the family size increase, so the demand curve of household sector would increase for water. Also, if there is the weather also responsible for made shifts in the water demand for household sector. Concerning the industrial and agricultural water demand, now imagine that this curve is the industrial and agricultural water demand curve. Movement along the industrial and agricultural water demand curve is due to a change in the price of the water, while the factors that affect industrial and agricultural water demands are the industrial process, crop choices, land uses, and irrigation technology. These are factors that make shift in the water demand curve for industrial and agriculture sectors.